It is the only way some of us survive.
Through the ice, sir. But the Polly died there.
Something strange beneath the waves. We must turn south now, Captain, or we are lost.
What if the greatest sea story about a giant monster and human obsession wasn't fiction? What if it was based on a real event so terrifying that the famous novel seems like a pale reflection of it? This is the true story of the whaling ship Essex, whose voyage in 1819 turned into a 94-day struggle for survival on the open ocean. Their engines were dead, and hope was lost thousands of miles from land. Watch the video to the end to find out what absurd decision Captain George Pollard Jr. made that doomed his crew to unimaginable trials, and what price was paid for survival. I will reveal to you a secret that links the prosperity of an entire city to a coming tragedy. In the early 19th century, Nantucket Island was not just a port, it was the world capital of whaling. The streets were paved with wealth, and the houses were built with money earned from blubber harvested on the other side of the world. The Essex was one of many ships that left this bone city in search of fortune. Captain George Pollard Jr. and his first mate, Owen Chase, were young, ambitious, and ready for a long voyage. The crew of 20 set sail in August 1819, expecting to be away for 2.5 years. It was standard practice, hard but incredibly lucrative work. Whale oil was the fuel that lit the cities of Europe and America, and ambergris was the basis for the most expensive perfumes. Every member of the crew, from the ship's boy to the captain, counted on their share of this risky but lucrative expedition. The Essex itself was a sturdy, proven vessel. It had already survived many voyages and was considered a lucky ship. Its holds were ready to take on thousands of barrels of valuable blubber. The crew was experienced, many of them not just neighbors from Nantucket, but relatives bound by a common cause and a common destiny. No one on board considered themselves adventurers or explorers. They were professionals doing hard and dangerous work. Their goal was not discovery, but economic gain. They sailed into the Pacific Ocean, to an area known as the Far Fishing Grounds, a place rich in sperm whales. The first year of sailing went relatively well. The ship rounded Cape Horn and entered the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The crew hunted, extracted blubber, and slowly filled the holds. It was a monotonous, exhausting routine, interrupted only by brief but fierce battles with the giants of the sea. They were masters of their craft. They knew how to track their prey, how to pursue it in light whaleboats, and how to deal with danger. Their craft had been honed by generations of whalers. They considered themselves masters of the ocean, capable of handling any challenge the elements threw at them. However, the ocean had a test in store for them that was beyond anything they could have imagined. They were at the peak of their craft, commanding one of the most reliable ships in the fleet. This confidence in their abilities and technology blinded them to what lay ahead. They did not yet know that their routine commercial voyage would become legendary. This voyage was supposed to make them rich. Instead, it brought them trials that would test the very foundations of human nature and morality. They sailed for riches, but found only despair. We are very interested in hearing your point of view. Do you think the economic boom of the time justified the incredible risks taken by the whalers? Write about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Are you ready to learn the truth about what happened on November 20th, 1820? On that day, the Essex was thousands of miles from the nearest coast of South America, in the heart of the Pacific Ocean. The crew was busy with their usual work, chasing a pod of sperm whales in their light whaleboats. Captain Pollard remained on board when the lookout noticed something unusual. It was not just a large specimen, it was a colossal force moving at incredible speed. Witnesses, including first mate Owen Chase, later described the creature as being of extraordinary size, about 85 feet long. But more important than its size was its behavior, which was beyond anything the whalers had ever experienced. The creature rammed the Essex the first time, piercing the hull and causing a severe leak. The ship shook from the impact, and the crew was knocked off their feet. This was unthinkable, as their prey usually tried to escape rather than attack the ship. The damage was severe, and the ship began to take on water. While the crew tried to assess the damage and begin pumping out the water, the creature turned for a second attack. It struck the bow of the ship with even greater force. The wooden structures creaked like matchsticks. It became clear that the ship was doomed. Captain Pollard gave the order to abandon ship. The crew had only a few minutes. They managed to lower the 3 surviving whaleboats and frantically gather the bare minimum of supplies: navigational instruments, a little bread, and fresh water. All their wealth, their home, and their future were sinking to the bottom. The Essex sank within a few hours. 20 men found themselves in 3 small, fragile boats in the middle of the endless ocean. There was nothing around them but water and the horizon. They had lost everything but their lives, but the struggle for those was just beginning. They were experienced sailors, but they were not prepared for this. Their skills were honed for hunting, not for survival in such extreme conditions. Their ship, the symbol of their power over the ocean, was destroyed in a matter of minutes. They gathered 3 whaleboats together to discuss their situation. In the next chapter, we'll see why the crew made a decision that historians would call absurd. The secret they kept in their navigation charts was more frightening than the open ocean. At the moment when the 3 boats came together, Captain Pollard faced a seemingly simple choice. They had navigation instruments and knew their approximate location. The nearest land, the Marquesas Islands, was about 1,000 miles to the west. It was a logical route. 1,000 miles in a boat is incredibly difficult, but with favorable winds, it was possible. However, when Pollard suggested this option, the crew, led by Owen Chase, objected. The reason for their refusal was not fear of the ocean, but fear of land. In the early 19th century, maps of the Pacific Ocean were full of not only islands, but also rumors. Sailors told stories of islands in the southern Pacific inhabited by tribes that practiced rituals that horrified Europeans. The Marquesas Islands had a bad reputation among whalers. They feared surviving the ocean only to meet a terrible end on shore. This fear, based on rumors and prejudice, outweighed logic. They collectively decided that it would be safer to sail east to the coast of South America. It was a truly absurd decision. They chose a route nearly 3,000 miles long against the prevailing winds and currents. They condemned themselves to a much longer and more painful journey instead of trusting the nearest land. Captain Pollard, despite his rank, yielded to pressure from the crew. This decision shows how strong the fear of the unknown was, and how rumors could influence the decisions of experienced sailors. They chose a familiar danger, the ocean, over an unknown danger on land. Thus they turned their boats eastward, beginning one of the longest and most tragic drifts in the history of navigation. They chose their own path, unaware that it would lead them to moral dilemmas far more frightening than those they had imagined in the Marquesas Islands. This decision was the first step in their descent into the abyss. They traded a real chance of salvation for a ghostly hope based on fear. The price of this decision would be measured not only in miles, but also in human lives. 3 boats, barely visible dots on the map, began their impossible journey. They sailed against the wind, against logic, and against common sense. This choice, made on the very first day, determined the entire course of the tragedy. They were sailors who feared land more than storms. This irony of fate became the leitmotif of their long journey. Like this video if you also find this turn of events incredible.
Secure everything you can find. Sail with the next
What happens when 3 tiny boats declare war on the Pacific Ocean? The first days after the shipwreck were spent in a state of shock and strict organization. The sailors, led by Chase and Pollard, distributed the meager supplies that had been salvaged from the Essex. They had a few biscuits, some fresh water, and a few turtles caught shortly before the disaster. They established strict rations, 1 biscuit and a tiny portion of water per person per day. This was barely enough to sustain life. But their main problem was not hunger, but the hostile environment. During the day, they were scorched by the merciless equatorial sun, and the nights were cold. The salt water corroded their skin, the boats constantly leaked, and the men were forced to sit in the water for hours. Any minor scratch on their bodies turned into a painful wound. They suffered from dehydration as the sun evaporated moisture from their bodies. Their boats were not designed for long sea voyages. They were light skiffs built for fast pursuit. They were exposed to all the winds and waves. Every storm threatened them with imminent destruction, and they had to make superhuman efforts to stay afloat. After several weeks, they reached the small, uninhabited island of Henderson. It was the first land they had seen since the crash. They desperately hoped to find water and food there, but the island turned out to be an almost barren rock. They found a small spring, but there was catastrophically little food. 3 men decided to stay on the island, preferring certain death on land to a slow death at sea. The others, having replenished their water supplies, set out to sea again. It was another difficult decision that divided the survivors. The boats were back in the open ocean. Their supplies, replenished on the island, were quickly running out. Hunger became their constant companion. They began to hallucinate, their minds weakened by lack of food and water. Soon, the boats were separated during a storm. Owen Joy's dinghy fell behind and disappeared from view. No one ever saw him again. Now there were only 2 boats left in the ocean, continuing their ghostly journey eastward. The sun was their enemy, but an even greater enemy was within them: despair. In the next chapter, you will learn how the storm and the loss of their companions changed everything. What do you think was worse, physical deprivation or psychological pressure? After Owen Joy's boat disappeared, the survivors on Pollard and Chase's lifeboats sank into even deeper despair. Now they were not just companions in misfortune, they were 2 small, isolated groups fighting for survival. Their numbers had dwindled, and their chances of rescue seemed even more remote. Hunger had reached its limit. Their meager supplies of biscuits and turtle meat had long since run out. They tried to catch fish, but without success. The ocean, which had been their source of wealth, now seemed like a lifeless desert, denying them even the bare necessities. The men grew weaker with each passing day. They could no longer row and could barely find the strength to bail water from the leaking boats. Conversation ceased, replaced by quiet delirium and moans. Their bodies were exhausted and their minds clouded. The moment came when Captain Pollard's boat ran completely out of supplies. They were faced with a choice that was beyond human comprehension. In order to survive, they had to resort to an ancient but horrific maritime custom. This custom was known as lottery. In a situation of extreme necessity, when all other means had been exhausted, sailors drew lots to determine who would sacrifice themselves for the sake of the others. It was a grim lottery, a decision that no one wanted to make, but one that was dictated by desperation. Young Owen Coffin, Captain Pollard's cousin, drew the short straw. It was a moment of utter tragedy. The captain offered to take his place, but the young man refused, saying that the lottery was fair. This act of self-sacrifice was the culmination of their suffering. The situation on Chase's boat was no less desperate. They also faced the loss of their comrades. Each sunrise brought not hope, but only a new round of torment. They were on the brink, balancing between life and complete oblivion. They were no longer just sailors who had been shipwrecked. They were shadows of their former selves, ghosts drifting in the ocean. Each of them carried within them the knowledge of what a person is capable of doing to see the next sunrise. This grim episode is central to the tragedy of the Essex. It shows how the thin veneer of civilization crumbles under the pressure of extreme circumstances. The moral laws of the land lose their power in the midst of the merciless ocean. Are you ready for the shocking truth about what happens when all hope is lost? The two boats Captain Pollard's and First Mate Chase's continued to drift. They were separated, and each group believed the other to be lost. Only a few remained on board, barely clinging to life. They spent more than 90 days at sea. That's almost 3 months in an open, leaking boat, without food, with minimal water, exposed to the whims of the elements. This ordeal surpasses anything imaginable. The sailors who left Nantucket as strong and confident professionals were now broken beings. They paid the highest price for their survival. They lost not only their ship and their comrades, but also a part of their humanity. The consequences of this ordeal would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The moral compromises they had to make became a burden they carried within themselves. It was not just a story of physical survival, but also of moral decline. Each of them survived, but each of them lost something irretrievably in that boundless ocean. They became living proof of how fragile human life is and how strong the instinct for self-preservation is. It was a victory of life over death, but it was a victory with a bitter aftertaste. They returned to the world of people, but they could never be the same again. The ocean took their innocence and left them with only memories. They proved that the human body is capable of enduring unimaginable hardship, but their story also raises the question, what is the price of such endurance? What remains of a person when they are forced to make inhuman choices? They paid for their survival, but the ocean was not done with them yet. In the next chapter, you will learn about their rescue, which was as incredible as their tragedy. Do you think it is possible to condemn people for choices made in such inhuman conditions?
We row east until we hit land, or die trying. We stick to the route, it's the only way.
After 94 days adrift, when the survivors were on the verge of complete exhaustion, a miracle happened. On February 18, 1821, the British whaling ship Indian spotted a strange object on the horizon. It was Owen Chase's boat. The captain of the Indiana was shocked to see the condition of the survivors. Chase, Benjamin Lawrence, and Thomas Nickerson, the ship's boy, looked more like ghosts than people. They were exhausted to the point of exhaustion, their minds clouded by suffering. They were immediately taken on board and surrounded with care and medical attention. They were the first survivors from the Essex to be rescued. Their story of the ship's destruction by a giant sperm whale and their subsequent drifting left their rescuers in shock. A few days later, on February 23rd, the American ship Dauphin came across a second boat. On board were Captain George Pollard and Charles Rumsdell. They were in even worse shape, surrounded by the consequences of their desperate decisions. The rescue of Pollard and Ramsdell was no less dramatic. The sailors of the Dauphin had difficulty recognizing the captain and crew member in these emaciated men. They were immediately taken to the port of Valparaiso in Chile, where they were reunited with the 3 survivors from Chase's boat. Thus, of the 20 men who left the Essex, only 5 survived. Later, a rescue expedition sent to Valparaiso returned to Henderson Island. There they found 3 sailors who had decided to stay behind, alive. Thus, the total number of survivors reached 8. 12 people died during this agonizing drift. The tragedy of the Essex was over, but its story was just beginning to make its way into the world. The survivors slowly regained their physical strength. However, their psychological wounds were much deeper. They had to return home and tell the truth about what had happened in the ocean. The survivors' return to Nantucket was difficult. The town that had sent them off as heroes seeking riches now greeted them with mixed feelings. Their story, passed from mouth to mouth, was full of grim details. Captain Pollard, as the ship's commander, bore the full weight of responsibility. He had to appear before the owners of the Essex and explain the loss of the ship. His account of the attack by a giant sperm whale was met with disbelief. At that time, it was unthinkable that a sea creature could deliberately attack and sink a large ship. Many ship owners and captains believed that Pollard was hiding something, that the ship had been lost due to his inexperience or mistake. However, Owen Chase, the first mate, wrote and published his memoirs almost immediately upon his return. The narrative of the most extraordinary and horrible shipwreck of the Whaleship Essex. The book became a sensation and confirmed the captain's words. Chase described in detail the attack, the drift, and all the horrors they had to endure. His narrative, filled with facts and personal experiences, left no doubt about the veracity of the story. The book became a bestseller and brought its author fame. Despite the shadow cast on his reputation, George Pollard Jr. was acquitted by the Commission of Inquiry. He was even entrusted with command of a new ship called Two Brothers. It seemed that life was giving him a second chance. However, fate was not kind to him. During his first voyage on the new ship, Pollard was shipwrecked again, this time off the Hawaiian Islands. Fortunately, this time the entire crew was saved without loss. After the second shipwreck, no ship owner would trust him with a ship again. Pollard was forced to end his maritime career. He returned to Nantucket and worked as a night watchman for the rest of his life. The story of the Essex would be incomplete without another participant, the ship's boy, Thomas Nickerson. He was one of the survivors from Chase's boat. At the time of the disaster, he was only 14 years old and went through the whole nightmare while still very young. Upon returning to Nantucket, Nickerson, like many others, continued his maritime career. He did not want to share his memories. The horrors he had witnessed were too difficult to put into words. However, many years later, already in his old age, he decided to write down his version of events. He wrote a detailed handwritten account of everything he remembered about the sinking of the Essex and the agonizing drift. He called it The Lost. Unlike Chase's report, written in the heat of the moment, Nickerson's memoirs were a look back from the depths of time. They were filled with reflection and details that an adult sailor might have missed. But for some reason, this manuscript was not published during his lifetime. Thomas Nickerson's manuscript was lost for decades. It was considered missing, and historians relied mainly on Owen Chase's account. It seemed that the voice of the Essex's cabin boy had been silenced forever. However, in 1960, a real miracle happened. The manuscript was accidentally discovered in the attic of an old house in Connecticut. It was Nickerson's notebook, which had been considered lost. The find was a sensation for maritime historians. It gave them a new and invaluable insight into the tragedy. Nickerson described in detail his feelings, fears, and how he, as a teenager, perceived what was happening. His notes added a human dimension to the story that was missing from Chase's more dry and factual account. He described not only the events, but also the psychological state of the crew. His manuscript was published and became an important part of the Essex's legacy.
The toll was immense. We faced the mental strain of constant fear.
Secure those lines now.
The legacy of the Essex went far beyond maritime history. This tragedy fueled one of the greatest works of world literature. In 1841, a young sailor named Herman Melville served on the whaling ship Acushnet. During his voyage, he met Owen Chase's son, who gave him a copy of his father's report to read. Melville was deeply moved by what he read, the story of a giant sperm whale deliberately attacking a ship, and the ensuing struggle for survival captured his imagination. Melville saw in this real tragedy something more than just a sea adventure. He saw in it a metaphor for man's struggle with nature, with fate, and with himself. The image of the vengeful white whale began to take shape in his mind. He had probably also heard about the fate of Captain Pollard. Melville even met him in Nantucket when he was already an old night watchman. This encounter with a man who had survived the unimaginable could not fail to leave its mark. In 1851, Herman Melville published his novel Moby-Dick, or The White Whale. The book was dedicated to Nathaniel Hawthorne, but its invisible godfathers were George Pollard and Owen Chase. Melville took a real story and turned it into an epic parable. We have followed the entire journey of the whaling ship Essex, from wealthy Nantucket to the point in the Pacific Ocean where their world split in two. We saw how an absurd decision made out of fear doomed the crew to 94 days of unimaginable hardship. This true story of survival, moral choice, and unimaginable resilience formed the basis for the legendary Moby-Dick. It reminds us that behind great myths, there are often real human destinies. 8 people survived, but the price they paid was unbearably high. They returned to the world, but were forever marked by the ocean that first gave them wealth and then took everything away from them. What other forgotten expeditions or survival stories do you think deserve to be told? Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new investigations into the mysteries of the past.